Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you all. So I'm here to represent Migrante Alberta, which is a Filipino organization that advocates for the rights and welfare of Filipino workers. And also, we're here as part of Women for Rights and Empowerment because we believe in solidarity work, which is part of our mandate. So as we observe Take Back the Night in Edmonton, the night that we collectively call to end all forms of violence against women, children, and LGBTQ, Migrante is also speaking out against different human rights violations that women migrants are prone to. On Sunday, October 22nd, Cindy McCormick, a successful dentist and a mother of two, was found dead in her hotel room. The reports in news in today's paper is that she is a victim of murder-suicide. Unfortunately, these stories have become a norm in daily news. Our community, the Filipino community, is not immune to situations like that. Cases of sexual harassment, maltreatment, trafficking, and economic abuses are only a few of the unimaginable things that the women migrant workers are experiencing during their stay in Canada as guest workers. Fortunate are those who can access permanent residency or still come home to the Philippines and be with their families. But what about those who are not as lucky to survive such ordeals? While the Me Too movement has encouraged survivors to speak out to demonstrate the magnitude of sexual violence against women, there are more out there who are not able to speak out because of fear. Fear of discussing a topic considered taboo in their culture back home, and for being blamed for what happened. Fear of repercussion for a migrant worker in a foreign country where there is no support from their own government or the host country. Or fear of jeopardizing their temporary status here in Canada, and consequently losing their dream of reunification with their family. Such is the situation of migrant women who are minorities living isolated in the home of their employers with a temporary working visa. It is the very nature of their precarious immigration status that renders them vulnerable as they are legislated to poverty, economic instability, and regarded as second-class citizens. Globalization and the trade of people has only contributed to the commodification and objectification of women of the Global South to work in rich countries as entertainers, caregivers, workers in the service sector. And just to illustrate some of the few situations that our women have experienced, we have caregivers that have been put in an unfortunate situation wherein a male employer would ask for a massage while the female employer is out of the house, living in an isolated area in the acreage with no public transportation and not knowing where to go, which adds to their fear and insecurity. We had a case wherein our member asked for help to escape from an abusive employer, and the only way to get out of the house is by stuffing her belongings in a garbage bag so that she can take out the trash while we were waiting in the car outside. Women in the service sector were pitted against each other in spite of sexual advances by employers so that they can be nominated in Alberta's Immigrant Nominee Program. And female farm workers under the Temporary Workers Program are left without the choice but to live in the same quarters where majority are men and they have no access to services or very little access to services for women and their help. A wife of a temporary worker who came to Canada under her husband's permanent residency application. And while she and her children have finally joined her husband, she now suffers from domestic violence and threats of deportation from her husband after finding out his extramarital affairs after long years of separation. So violence is a stark reality that women have to struggle with every day. For us Filipino women who grapple with poverty in a feudal patriarchal context, the challenge is greater. The intensifying global economic and political crisis is increasing the vulnerability of women and LGBTQ to gender-based violence. Gruesome stories of violence committed on women, children, and LGBTQ have become common in TV, radio, and print media. And these are not only individual cases of violence. Many involve groups of women, such as cases of trafficking and so on. But the primary barrier in the advancement towards women's rights and gender equality is still the patriarchal system that is bred by the culture of capitalism and imperialism. Unless changes occur in the economic and political system, we will not see an end to violence against women. Thus, we also campaign against economic violence by joining the struggle for jobs, higher wages, and increased government budget for social services, against increasing prices of basic commodities and other economic issues that exacerbate poverty. Indeed, in our fight against different forms of violence against women, for us Filipino migrants, we also fight for the change of the feudal patriarchal system and the socio-economic system that forced us to migrate, that pervades in the Philippines today, while we're also fighting for our right to stay here in Canada. Migrante Alberta believes in the comprehensive scope of violence against women. It is important for us all to recognize our role as individuals, but it must not end there. We need to look further within the women's movement and the people's movement to raise our awareness, to organize, to mobilize, to eliminate all forms of violence against women. We need to address this within the society that perpetuates the culture of women's oppression. We need to break the culture of silence from the individual to the collective, and so from me too, I say us too. Onwards with the liberation of women, and onwards with the liberation of all.